Thank you, Hugh, for the stories behind framing the works of art. We are enlightened on how frames are carefully chosen to reflect the geography and history of the collection at the National Gallery of Art. This reminds me of how frame is akin to a good movie soundtrack, where it's carefully composed to embrace and augment a movie that makes the movie ever more memorable. We now hear that framing does the same wonders. Anyway, before I open up the floor for any question, I'll first like to introduce Esther. Esther is the Senior Conservator with Heritage Conservation Centre. She's also the Head of Section for Paper Conservation. Hugh will be taking most of the questions primarily, but Esther will be providing some local perspective if relevant. Yeah. So for the next 30 minutes till 4 o'clock, we will be taking questions from the floor. Let me see what time is it. Yeah, we have some time till 4 o'clock. So if you have questions, you can raise your hands and you can just walk to one of the mics at the side, or the mics will go to you, probably. And you can briefly introduce yourself and where you're from, your name and where you're from before your question. Are there any questions from the floor? Oh, yes.
Hi, my name is Maureen. I'm French. Been living in Singapore for 5 years or so. I'm a decorator and volunteer docent at a few museums here, including the National Gallery that you've seen. And this is my question. Now that you've seen our National Gallery, what would be your main recommendation based on what you have seen in terms of preservation?
All I can say is here and keep full speed ahead. Everything I saw I thought was fantastic. And the first time I was in Singapore was in 1975, 76. And when I visiting Southeast Asia, you immediately realize that the geographic challenges are mind-blowing. And to see the job that has been done, bring two buildings together in such a beautiful architectural entity to form one, and the sensitivity that was maintained to the history of both buildings. I love the idea of this sort of tree system that exists in between. I think the thing is one of the best museums that I've seen. So I really have every confidence that everything is going to be done as well as possibly can, and that I know that they will reach out to colleagues in other parts of the world, because I'm here, and because none of us knows the answer. We're all trying to get better together, but good problems actually cause good solutions. So I'm looking forward to, and and it will be nice to go back to North America and tell everyone all the wonderful things I saw in Singapore. So one of the things that I have been hammering all kinds of museums about in Europe and in North America is using radio frequency identification, and guess what? They're doing it here. So now I get to go back and say, you too can do what Singapore is doing. So it's great to take this back and beat them over the head with it. I'm honored.
RFID
honored to be able to do it. Absolutely.
Otherwise, I have one for you. Yes, please. You're known to invent many innovative methods, such as mounting without adhesive. Where do you get your inspiration from?
Mostly from the past. Okay.
Yeah, you have said that.
Okay. So one of my, and I have a slide of this in one of my other talks, but one of the best things I saw when I spent a year traveling in Southeast Asia
was the bell in Mandalay. So in Mandalay there is a colossal bell, and when the British were closing down the Raj, they thought they would take them back with them, and so they put it on a barge in the middle of the Irrawaddy River, and the barge turned over and the bell sank into the mud. And the British tried and tried and tried to get it out, and they couldn't do it. So when they left, the Burmese dived down and started tying bamboo to it. And when they had tied enough bamboo, it floated, and they pulled it back to the temple and put it back where it was supposed to be. So anything done in little tiny pieces is absolutely something that I think we should always favor. keeping things simple, keeping the weight distributed. These are all, it's ancestral wisdom, if you will. And that's exactly what I count on. Every time I go someplace, I'm looking at all the things I've seen in the Philippines when they would want to preserve their ancestors. They would put them in caves at the top of a cliff. So to keep predation down and to keep the relative humidity. Same place the Essenes hid the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's great. It limits visitorship, and it's got a great climate. So that was the best climate you could find in the Philippine jungles. So just looking back at the past all the time, that's always my primary source of inspiration.
There is adhesive hinging of the works to the back mat. There's also non-adhesive hinging to the back mat. So how is the National Gallery doing it, in the sense that how do you always just try to do non-adhesive?
Sadly, we're not. That's beyond our capacities, because if you tried to secure works of art to a support without an adhesive, no one is quite the magician that is able to do it without something showing. So what we tend to have to do is, if we're going to do something without an adhesive, we have to cover the edges. And that tends to be very unpopular with our curatorial brethren and sisters. So we make compromises and do the best we can, but invariably we try to use the least invasive technique possible and still give the curators the visual result that we want, because the National Gallery is a gallery. It's and it's in the, so things must look as they're supposed to look. There is more in-painting in the collections of the National Gallery than there is in some other museums. We have some of the world's best in-painters. And, but why I am particularly interested in ensuring that we are enclosing things to a greater degree as possible, and this is why it's wonderful to have some of these glazing materials that are literally invisible. You know, when you have them properly lighted, I can't see them anymore. I've walked in and said, wait a minute, oh yes, I see, there is glass, but it fools Mother Nature, if you will. But it's a great protection, because we had a Gauguin painting on loan from the Met, and a dissatisfied, mentally not stable visitor, a lady went and started pounding on it, and thank goodness there was opium in front of it, so no harm, no foul, but sorry, Met. And the problem is, when your visitors want to have one of these mental moments, that no guard force in the world can stop them. They'll move like a hungry cat to have their event, and it's going to happen. So guarding is not the answer. Glazing is much better. The other thing we're finding is, and if you do get to visit Washington, you will see Van Gogh's White Roses. They used to be pink. Like so many Van Goghs, all the reds have turned, they're all gone. He used organic reds in there. The blue bedroom used to be lavender. So, and people, fortunately, they can go back with digital imagery and restore them as to what they used to be, and we can, so what we're also finding out, the colors that we thought were light fast, some of the cadmium colors and some of the yellows are actually turning brown in Matisse. So limiting oxidation in all of your collections, it should be protected not only from human biology, but also from change from the oxidative atmosphere that the humans require to breathe.
Hi, I'm Mary Liu. I'm the paper conservator for the National Gallery in Singapore here. And my question actually is, in your ideal world, I'm curious to know how you see how the conservator, the framer, and the curator interact, and what are their own domain when it comes to framing and mounting.
Teamwork is absolutely vital, and invariably my view is that the person who has the final say is the conservator. The best curator, I've lectured in France a lot, and of course they have everything backwards. to the conservators or the curators, and so I'm used to people switching roles, but I think actually we should just all be part of the same effort, and the effort should be that we want to give each generation their fair share of the appreciative experience of these things, but we don't want to burn something up and have it gone, or we don't want to leave something for generations unborn. So we need to, that's what I think conservation really comprises, is wide use. But we have, from the preservation subset in conservation, we should be getting, and I hope we are, solutions that allow us to keep things without change when we put them in a dark, cool, dry place and leave them in storage. Then when they have to come out for whatever reason, and that's the conversation between the conservator and the curator, then they should come out in as safe a thing as setting as possible. So one of the things that I've spent a long time working out and trying to make more economically and temporally feasible is simple, safe packages that exclude oxygen for all items that are vulnerable to oxidation, which means almost anything, and especially things that have just recently gone through conservation, because they have extra added value from the conservation costs, and they have just gone through probably some chemical change. So you really want to stabilize them and keep that from having the predation of O2 and the other gases around us. So making things as simple and safe as possible. What I did for my entire time at the gallery was to try to keep the curators and the conservators and the designers all happy at the same time. And this usually meant I had to come up with some bright idea so no one knew there were no costs on any tab, essentially. Yeah.
Okay, so Hugh, please share with us some bright ideas that you have, because I'm sure everybody would like to hear how to compromise between the curators' interests, the conservators, as well as other stakeholders.
One of the things that I was particularly, and I watched this from its infancy, is to see the growth in safe anti-reflective glazing, because I've been around long enough that the glass that is not the acid-etched glass, which you think of as non-glare glass, which is terrible to look through because you see so little through it, when they put a reflection-canceling thin film coating on glass, which started in Mainz, Germany for Schott AG, that then came to the US as what was called Den glass. And there was a lot of it at the National Gallery when I arrived there, and I helped use that in a lot of settings because we had such a giant supply. But it's frighteningly difficult to work with because it is thin, and when it cracks or breaks, the edges of that glass are sharp at the molecular level. So you have to worry about any piece of glass that is not laminated. So we went from using that to using low iron laminated glass with the same reflection canceling coating, either at Amaron or Luxar from Europe, and then there have been North American equivalents that came out, but ultimately I think the best product was one that I watched be developed by TrueView Corporation, which is a acrylic sheet which is not only anti-reflective but also is static dispersive. So it means it has no static, it has no, it can filter ultraviolet, and it stops visitors from attacking paintings. The problem is when we use this as a packaging material, it also leaks water. This is what we found out, and I was putting the slide up to illustrate. So we have to constantly look at each of these things and worry our way forward to come up with better solutions, because if you use one of the very expensive low iron laminates, you've probably blown a lot of budgets. They used to be $110 US a square foot, and very few people can afford that. So my effort is to try and make everything, give everyone what they want, and not bust the budget, and keep it as safe as possible.
Okay, so what you're saying is that preservation is the way to go. preserve first.
Yep.
Prevention is definitely more cheaper as compared to interventive conservation.
Exactly right. Exactly. If the last thing that the conservator wants to do is to see something at risk and to see something cross their table. So if we can keep things in what I would call a virginal state, or and what this looks like in my experience is John Marin Jr., the son of the great American artist, gave the National Gallery 40 of his father's watercolors that had never been exhibited. And what we see in those watercolors, I hope they actually put them on the web so people can see what this artist was. A spectacular watercolorist, and everything you've ever seen in your life has been faded, except for the things that are sitting in the storage boxes in Washington. And his reputation, I think, would be sky high if his work hadn't faded it. So by preserving things and only taking them out to photograph them, and I saw a wonderful job of that yesterday at your National Gallery, that's a great way of giving broad access planet-wide to things, because we have really, not my images, which are terrible, I apologize, but there are great images online where we can share these things and truly appreciate the things that have not suffered from overexposure. Yep.
Okay, maybe I'll ask one more question that's probably of interest to non-conservators. If there's a new product that's unknown to us, we understand that you use a lot of new products and explore many new materials that are not usually in use in the conservation world. So if there's a new product unknown to us, is there a guide or some sort of rule of thumb that can help us to make educated guesses on whether the product or the material is safe for use as a storage, conservation, or framing material?
It's a brilliant question, and one that is very near and dear to my experience, because I am in trying to broaden the palette of materials we have to work with. I am constantly looking for new things, and I am proud to say assisted by friends in industry who will warn me about potential chemical hazards. So when I find this out, I just came up with a new sealing foil, and my friend John Dunphy said, oh, worry about slip agents. So now I start to redesign everything to address that problem. So I think collaboration is a profound tool, and I learned this working with my colleague Ruth Fine. We had a wonderful appreciation of the Gemini studio called Art and Collaboration. And at the opening of that, there was Robert Rauschenberg, there were Jasper Johns. They were falling all over their printers because they knew the printers were the ones who really made things work. All of these things are a collaboration. And I think if we can collaborate between the conservation and preservation groups outside of industry and those in industry to begin to look and address which materials are safe and which are not. If we focus on things that already have been tested for medical or food use and or military use, we're probably going to be half the way there. But ultimately, the best thing we can do is, as soon as you hear some problem, address that problem and say, I was wrong. So that's why I'm telling you about the slip agent thing that just occurred to me is I want people to know that as soon as I hear anything, I'm going to go, whoops, that has a problem here, so we're going to do that with it, which means that I'm constantly revising what I'm advising people to do. And as far as I'm concerned, that's just the part of the Japanese process of Kaizen, continuous improvement. And industry understands the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. I think we really like the fact that we really like the fact that going for materials from the food and pharmaceutical industry, they are good candidates, good potential candidates. Yeah. Okay. I think there's one question for.
We know that a work of art may suffer different factors of deterioration, from light, from high relative humidity in the environment. Can you talk a little bit about the use of pollutant scavengers inside a good enclosure, and adsorbs and things?
Yeah. One of the things that I have come to realize is that when we look at works of art, we worry a lot about things fading. Well, fading, the technical term for it is photooxidation. It is the reaction happens when the light hits the color and it causes an electron to move to a new orbit. And if there is no oxidizing gas present, the electron will return to its original place fine. But if there is oxygen there, it will not go back where it was supposed to be. So we will have photooxidation. That's what fading is. And so the extent to which we can limit the influx of oxidizing gases is already going to begin to address that. But the other thing I found just in testing, and I've done a lot of it in my garden, is the drier things are, the less oxygen there is. So the simplest, inexpensive way you can limit photooxidation. And I'm not going, if you go to Tate London or if you go to the Getty, they're trying to, or the Library of Congress or the National Archives, they have oxygen-free enclosures that cost millions of dollars. I'm trying to think, can we make a hypoxic or a low oxygen enclosure for tens of dollars? And how we're going to get there, I'm not sure yet, but I'm not going to, I do lose sleep over it. And this is what I think about at night when I can't sleep, because it's a fascinating thing, and I think the future is going to be so grateful if we do make any headway on any of this. So by actually creating, every time we lower the oxidation level of artwork, and that's stop the influx of new oxidizing gases and make it a little as dry as we can safely do, then I think we're not solving the problem, but we're certainly making it better. And certainly if you could have something which, if when you put it on display you make it a little drier than normal, just while it's on display, to try to address this photooxidation issue. That's another side of the... At this point, my role, because I'm not involved in the federal government anymore, is to try to ask questions and elicit answers from my wise colleagues in the institutions around the world. So, expect to be asked questions.
So it's almost like human aging. We need to slow down oxidation in our human body as well. Are there any more questions from the ground? Sorry? Yes, Swiman.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Swiman. I'm from Heritage Conservation Center. I just have a question, is that since we are in the tropics, are there actually differences are there differences in framing methods in order to improve preservation, from your opinion and observation? Thank you.
I absolutely think that framing can do a lot to address the issues not just of relative humidity, but also of integrated pest management. A properly designed enclosure made with metal foils and good glazing materials and tight seals will keep pests away, and it will keep the relative humidity lower, and it will keep oxidizing gases away. So I don't mean to sound as a panacea, because it's limited in its potential in some ways, but I think it is almost the best money one can spend to preserve your collections by enclosing things as much as possible. And what I've been trying to really share with people are looking at the potential of different materials like polyethylene terephthalate, which breed that Mylar Melanex, which happens to be a good oxygen barrier. And so how we can extend its use and think about ways of how we can keep these Mylar protected things to be as dry as possible, because it's very difficult to make buildings behave. I've spent 35 years working in the world's first air-conditioned building, and I watched them pull the air conditioners out of the West Building, the National Gallery, when it was being rehabilitated. And all I can tell you is I used to go in at 5:30 in the morning because I couldn't stand the traffic, and I watched the building have bad days. Okay, so no building, especially buildings that have lots of atria, there are always going to be climate problems there. So what I was constantly saying, my colleagues had the brilliant idea of inviting Cecily Griswack from the Getty to come work with the buildings people as an environmental conservator in the National Gallery, which is, I think, a fabulous idea. And I was always saying to her, if you have a very difficult to control part of the building, then ask us to make enclosures in that part to help you out. Because it's easier to handle a problem locally than to do it building-wide. Absolutely.
Hello, I'm Mar. I'm the painting conservator for the National Gallery of Singapore. And I wanted to ask you, from your experience in the National Gallery of Washington, what is your approach towards exhibiting paintings in uncontrolled areas?
Our approach was to enclose them. Okay, pretty much, yes, exactly. So it's not that we never had any uncontrolled areas, but we had areas with more problematic climates. So if you visited the modern building in Washington, the IMP building, you will notice it's a giant atrium around which galleries cluster. And the way it is actually run in the winter is the relative humidity has to go down to 35%. Because if it's higher than that,
the glazing frame at top gets too cold and it rains. So with that said, the way they run the building is that the galleries on the outside are museum normal, and all the water, all the air goes from there into the atrium. So I'm assuming that the same kinds of things will be true here in Singapore, because you have large communal spaces and then small discrete spaces. And it takes a lot of wise building management to make it happen. But almost invariably, someone will come up with the idea that this very delicate item should go out into the atrium, should go out into this uncontrolled space. And I promise, if it hasn't happened yet, it's about to happen tomorrow. It will happen. And that's when my job is always to say, and we will make it safe.
Okay, so you recommend microclimate?
Exactly. Yeah.
But I understand that paintings in HCC, our painting section do not really generally practice microclimate. Yeah, so probably I'm not sure whether you can elaborate a little bit more about, microclimating for paintings or as in canvas paintings.
well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
I want glazing in front of everything.
You saw the spit on the glass there. Every time we have one of these anti-reflective glasses, we get it down, and someone has expectorated on it. So
I am the poster child for glazing everything. And now, you may think this is me speaking as a representative of a glazing manufacturer, and it's not wrong, but that's one reason why I'm delighted to work for them. I think that the curatorial impulse to say people should have a kind of intimate relationship with something from the very distant past is something, it's a really wonderful idea, and I used to love going to the Freer because I got to look at all their scrolls and screens with nothing in the way. You can't. I moved to Washington because I love the Freer so much. I love Asian art. And I was there when they put in glass in front of all their everything. And it broke my heart. And I said, we need it. Because the reason the Freer worked is because no one was ever there. You know, it's really easy when you have no crowds to control, but as soon as if you go to the Met, and you'll see that the crowds are enormous, anytime when the museum really is functioning at that very high level, glazing becomes absolutely vital. So then it's a question of, can you get a good lighting designer and good glazing material? And if you can and you do it, it's invisible. It can really go away. And that's the win-win. This is what I'm always trying to orchestrate, is make it work for everybody. Yes, and now we have the problem of the modern. And we saw that in Rauschenberg. And yeah, I have to say mea culpa. I have hung more modern art on paper on the wall with nothing in front of it. And fortunately, it was never in an exhibition that had heavy attendance. So if we had, we would have had issues and problems. But it's always a conversation.
But you can always find a compromise, isn't it? Because
Exactly.
they want to do it, so you just have to give as much options, to preserve the artwork, but we can't just say no. We shouldn't say no, because we shouldn't allow that to be a habit.
I spent my adult life working for conservators who had been overturned. Every time they gave a recommendation, the answer came back, and we're not going to do it. Then my impulse was, okay, how do I make my conservator bosses happy, and I give them what they want, given that the other people, the administration and the curators, want to do what they want to do. So it's not always easy, and sometimes, as with that Memling, it took really kind of walking on waters to get there, but it can happen. And I think we're very fortunate to be in an age when we will be able to see microclimate enclosures much more broadly employed with much less adverse visual impact. So it's getting there. But when you have installations of modern assemblages, they get what they deserve.
So which means that we can actually do microclimating without compromising the aesthetics.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I have seen it happen in too many cases.
Okay, I think we have probably time for one last question, because we have 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay, maybe we'll give it to Anthony. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I'm Anthony from Heritage Conservation Center. So I'd like to know, with your experience, what would be your recommendations for the types of glazing available for use, especially in the context where private museums or other countries in Asia are trying to preserve their collection, but they are constrained by budget or funding?
Yes, it's an excellent question. And invariably, the ideal would be, if everyone could afford it, we would be using laminated low iron anti-reflective glass, because it's a vapor barrier and it's also can be lit to the point of being invisible. Therefore, we can have completely effective long-term climate control. The problem is, as you pointed out in your question, budgets do not allow it. It's so then, and what I'm really trying to look at now, and will be later in this week, is the possibility of combining anti-reflective glass with anti-reflective plastic in a staged sort of thermopane configuration that may achieve the same visual effect and not have this, because when you use one of these laminated glasses, it's not only fragile, it's heavy as can be. And heaviness is very dangerous in art handling, because things happen when things weigh a lot. So it's what I'm trying to do, and what I'm hoping to work with folks here to look at is, how can we come up with different options, because the anti-reflective is and where we can't make it anti-reflective, we could use ordinary glass and ordinary plastic, but still achieve a vapor barrier that is safe. So as long as we can space them away and we don't get any Newton rings, it should work. And I hope we'll have better answers for you by Friday.
So anyway, thank you very much for, I'm sure there are probably other questions that you can engage Hugh at the reception outside on a one-to-one basis, free consultation. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, thank you, Hugh, for sharing your expertise with us today. We are very much enlightened on how frames are very carefully chosen to reflect the geography and history of the collection in the National Gallery of Art. And we do appreciate even more that the frames are more protective as well as much as they are aesthetic. We also learned how it's important to be informed about properties of any materials. Yeah, and by being aware of the properties of materials, we can then be creative and have fun utilizing them innovatively in the way we design our preservation, storage, and framing methods. So thank you, Hugh, once again. And thank you everybody for spending the afternoon with us, and have a great evening.
All right, thank you again for joining all of us, and thank you to Ms. Lowe and Mr. Phibbs. Before we leave today, you may have received an evaluation form on your way in. Please take a moment to fill it up. Your feedback is very important to us in developing programs for NHB and beyond. In addition, when you're done, please join us outside for tea, and please look out for our other programs. Oh yes, and if we have a moment, we would like Ms. Lowe to present a token of appreciation for Mr. Phibbs.
Exactly. So that just lets you focus on the